Hello viewers, today let's learn about a beautiful poem titled The Lake Isle of Innisfree, written by William Butler Yeats in the year 1888. This is one of his first great poems and one of his important enduring poems. The poem was published in the year 1890 in the National Observer. The poem, taken from his second collection, The Rose, stands as an example of his early lyric style. Innisfree, the name which means the Heather Island in Gaelic, is an island off the coast of Ireland of intense natural beauty. This is the island situated in Lough Gill, in County Sligo, the place from where Yeats's mother's family came from, and he identifies it as that part of the Ireland and a world which is closest to his heart. This is the place where Yeats dreamed of living all alone in search of wisdom. When he was in his teens, he had enjoyed the natural life in Sligo to such an extent the memories of the scenic beauty and the attractions of Sligo still remained cherished in his heart. He was prompted to write this poem in London, where he felt exiled from the rural beauty that he so brilliantly captures in this poem. Hence, this poem reveals the poet's desire to escape from fever and fret of the miserable city life to a peaceful, tranquil and ideal place. He would go to the island and build a cabin there. The idea of building a cabin and living as a hermit, Yeats was influenced by the American transcendentalists such as Thoreau. The poet, like Thoreau, expresses a deep desire to seek peace and tranquility in nature. Once he wrote in a letter saying that, "My father read to me some passage from Walden, and I plan to live some day in a cottage on a little island called Innisfree." He further wrote in his autobiographies like this: "I had still the ambition formed in Sligo in my teens of living in imitation of Thoreau on Innisfree, a little island in Lough Gill, and walking through Fleet Street very homesick, I heard a little tinkle of water and saw a fountain in a shop window which balanced a little ball upon its jet, and began to remember lake water. From the sudden remembrance came my poem Innisfree, my first lyric with anything in its rhythm of my own music. I had begun to loosen rhythm as an escape from rhetoric, and from that emotion of the crowd that rhetoric brings, but I only understood vaguely and occasionally that I must, for my special purpose, use nothing but the common syntax. A couple of years later, I would not have written that first line with its conventional archaism, arise and go, nor the immersion in the last stanza." When we look at the background of the poem, we remember that Yeats wrote this poem while he was living in London. So we can discuss the background in the following way. Probably Yeats was lying buried under and entangled in the clutches of a mad city life. And at one point it became so unbearable and suffocating to him, and if it continues to go on so, he would leave to Innisfree never to return. Standing on the streets of London, he dreamed of the beautiful and quiet Lake Isle of Innisfree while residing in an urban setting. He also dreamed about the secluded and self-sufficient life that it would be possible for him to live there. In fact, when Yeats was a child, his father had read to him from Walden by Henry David Thoreau, and Yeats described his inspiration for the poem, saying that while he was a teenager, he wished to imitate Thoreau by living on Innisfree, an uninhabited island situated in Lough Gill. Yeats would visit the land at Lough Gill at night, often accompanied by his cousin Henry Middleton, and at one occasion, both of them went on to the lake in a yacht to observe the birds and to listen to the stories by the crew. The trips that Yeats took from the streets of Sligo to the remote areas of the lake had set up for him the contrasting images of the city life and the nature that he describes in this text. He suggests that in London he was often homesick for Ireland, and he would walk down the Fleet Street longing for the seclusion of pastoral Isle and nothing but the Innisfree. When he hears the sound of the water coming from the fountain of a shop window, he was reminded of immediately the Lake Isle of Innisfree, which he had previously seen. And this is the inspiration that Yeats credits for the creation of the poem. Now, after learning the background of the poem, let's learn briefly about the poet also. William Butler Yeats is one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. Born in Dublin, Ireland in 1865, he was the son of a well-known famous painter, John Butler Yeats. He spent his childhood in Sligo, where his parents were raised, and in London also. At the age of 15, he returned to Dublin to continue his education and to study painting. But he quickly discovered that his preference was poetry. Born from Anglo-Irish landowning class, he became involved with the Celtic Revival, a movement against the cultural influences of England in Ireland during the Victorian period, sought to promote the spirit of the Irish cultural heritage. Though he never learned Gaelic himself, his writing at the turn of century drew extensively from the Irish mythology and folklore. He was also deeply involved in the politics of Ireland. In 20s, despite the Irish independence from England, his verse reflected pessimism about the political situation in Ireland and also the rest of Europe. And after 1910, his writing was strongly influenced by Ezra Pound, becoming more modern in its incision and imagery. But yet, Yeats never abandoned his strict adherence to the traditional forms of the verse. He had a lifelong interest in mysticism and occult, and he never went back in advancing his idiosyncratic philosophy, and his poetry continued to grow stronger as he grew older. Appointed as a senator in Irish Free State in the year 1922, he was remembered as a very important cultural leader, a major playwright, because he was one of the founders of Abbey Theatre in Dublin, and of course one of the greatest poets of the century in any language. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1923 and died in the year 1939 at the age of 73. Now let's learn the meaning of the poem line by line. But before we go to the meaning, let's read the poem once. The Lake Isle of Innisfree, written by William Butler Yeats. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 ween rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. The poem is a 12-line poem divided into 3 stanzas of 4 lines each and stands as an example of Yeats's early lyric poems. Throughout the 3 short quatrains, the poem explores the poet's longing for the peace and tranquility of Innisfree while residing in an urban setting. In the poem, the poet yearns to return to Innisfree because of the peace and quiet it affords. He can escape the noise of the city and be lulled by the lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. On the island, he can return to the nature by growing beans and having beehives, and also enjoying the purple glow of the noon and the sounds of birds' wings and of course the bees. He can even build a cabin there, as the American transcendentalist Thoreau lived on the Walden Pond. Now coming to the lines exactly. The first stanza speaks about the poet's desire to go to the lake isle of Innisfree and live there in search of wisdom. The first 2 lines of the poem say that the poet wants to go to Innisfree without any further delay and wants to build a cabin there made of clay and wattles. This is the construction in the framework of interwoven twigs and stems. And in the 3rd line, he says that he wants to grow 9 rows of beans. The number 9 stops us, it intrigues us. Now here, it can be related to the fact that Yeats throughout his life was committed to the things which are of mystical and supernatural. And 9 is that number which is believed to have a mystical association. And then he goes on further to say that he wants to have a huge hive for bees in the cabin's yard, in whose company he would live all alone in the open glade in the middle of the forest of the island of Innisfree with the high buzzing sounds of busy bees. And in the 2nd stanza, we can see that Yeats's belief. He says that once he settles down in Innisfree, he would acquire a great measure of peace that would come dropping slowly from heaven, as the morning dew that falls on the ground and stays there throughout the night, blending with the singing of the cricket till late morning the next day. Then everything altogether suddenly disappears with the rising of the morning mist, just like a veil is lifted up from the face of a bride. Then the 3rd line speaks about the glimmering darkness of the midnight and the purple glow of the noon, which sets the scene perfectly in the evening for the flocks of linnets, that is the singing birds, flying to and fro in and around the cabin. And finally, in the 3rd stanza, we can feel Yeats's urgency to go to Innisfree immediately, because eternally, day and night, he hears the lake water lapping with low sounds softly by the shore of Innisfree. Wherever he stands, whether in the island or on the roadside or on the grave pavements, he continues to hear it in the very core of his heart. And now, let's discuss the beautiful aspect of any poem, that is the structure and style of the poem. When we look at the structure of the poem The Lake Isle of Innisfree, we are immediately reminded of Yeats, that he was an Irish poet and his poems were acclaimed much because of the musical content. The Lake Isle of Innisfree was also born out of an exquisite pastoral tune. The poem, written largely in hexameters, has a tranquil rhythm which Yeats emphasizes in his reading. This is somewhat at odds with more contemporary vocal styles which favor a more conversational tone, but Yeats' quavering incantation has a unique power of its own. It has 6 stresses in each line in a loosely iambic pattern. The last line of every stanza is shortened to a line in tetrameter with only 4 stresses. Each of the stanza has ABAB scheme, rhyming scheme. Formally, this is also somewhat unusual for the poet because he hardly expressed his poetry in hexameters. And everywhere it is the full rhyme scheme. There is no sign of half rhyme, which Yeats preferred in his later work. The whole poem is filled with natural metaphors and images that immerse the reader in a dream from where he or she is immediately going to be awakened. This is briefly the structure of the poem. But the style of the poem, I would like to put it under the following heads. Firstly, the speaker or the persona. Who is the speaker in the poem? The speaker is none other than but the poet himself. The poet speaks about the beautiful and idyllic Isle of Innisfree, which is situated in Log Hill. In the midst of nature, he is able to enjoy the beauty and harmony of the nature. Secondly, the setting. The physical setting of the poem is the peaceful Irish countryside. The words which tell us this are cabin, clay, wattles, glade, etc. The setting also describes the different parts of the day, such as the daytime is given by the 9-bean rows, honeybees, etc. The morning time is given by the veils of the morning. Noon time is given by the purple glow of the noon. And the evening time is given by the evening full of linnets' wings and cricket singing. And finally, the night is given by their midnights all a glimmer. Thirdly, the theme of the poem. The theme, as evident, is nature. Nature brings harmony and peace to man. Nature provides the man with scenic sights and sounds which pleases him and enables him to live stress-free lives. Man must learn to live close to nature. The poet himself wants to escape to this beautiful place and build his dream home there. Then fourthly, I would discuss the moral values that are embedded in the poem. The world we live in today is polluted with noise and dirt. Like Yeats, we yearn for a natural retreat away from our stress-filled lives. Man must learn to appreciate the natural beauty. Man will be able to find peace in nature. Then, the tone and the mood of the poem. The tone of the poem can be described as peaceful, thoughtful, expectant, and harmonious in keeping with the poem's theme. The line which says about this is, "And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow." And lastly, but not the least, is the structure and style. The structure, as evident, is a 12-line poem divided into 3 stanzas of 4 lines. But there are a number of elements in the poem, such as we are brought into imagination by the words like veils of the morning, noon a purple glow, bee loud glade, cricket sings, etc. And there are a number of metaphors in the poem like peace comes dropping slow, midnights all a glimmer, etc. And we also have the effect of alliteration in the line lake water lapping with low sounds. And now finally we have come to close of this poem's discussion, but let us try to critically appreciate the poem. The Lake Isle of Innisfree by W.B. Yeats essentially talks about the nature and the ideal of life that Yeats wanted at a certain point of his life. Yeats shows a desire of going all alone and to be free, from the very first line, which says that I will arise and go now. This will of going alone and staying free reflects the problems of the society that the world has ever had and we still have today. All these problems make the society think about of an ideal place to live in, or at least to look at, and this is what is reflected in the poem. Secondly, we can say that the poem is tranquility recollected in emotion. The Lake Isle of Innisfree beckons Yeats with its promise of some peace away from the London's grey pavements. Yeats expresses a deep desire to seek peace and tranquility. The tranquil hypnotic hexameters recreate the rhythmic pulse of the tide. The simple imagery of quiet life that the poet longs to lead as he enumerates the qualities line by line. It immerses the reader into his idyllic fantasy until the penultimate line jolts the speaker as well as the reader back into the reality of his drab urban existence. The line which speaks about this is, "While I stand on the roadway or on the pavements grey." This poem has always been a sensation in the poetry reading public. Imagine anyone walking through the crowded city streets, subjecting himself to the vehicle fumes, the dirt and noise, and the irritation of rubbing elbows with others will wish to go to some place where the things are in opposite. All will have one such place in his mind. The quiet and placid Lake Isle of Innisfree was made a universal symbol to any poetry reader's mind. And Yeats had immortalized this place of his choice through this poem. Thirdly, we can speak about the colors and the sounds of the poem. The colors depicted and the sounds heard in the poem are those aspects that increase the beauty of the poem. For example, the grey pavements suggest the dullness of the city in which he is living. Also, the purple glow of the noon suggests the beauty of Innisfree, which he loves so much. And the sounds like the bee-loud glade, the cricket singing, the sounds of linnet's wings, the sounds of peas dropping slowly, simply reiterates the lovely poem of longing. One can go to Innisfree anytime as long as he puts the material world in its place and yearns to be in close relationship with nature. We have come to the end of the poem. I hope we have discussed all the aspects of the poem. Thank you.